you look here, you see Jordan wanted me to be sure to point out the difference in a forest clearing and a clear cut. If you do a clear cut, generally that's something you're doing to reforest something. You're starting to forest over. This area behind you is it was a bug spot from the 2000-2001 bug spot era. It came back in a lot of mixed hardwood. It had some very sparse pine out there. It was an opportunity that fit in well for us to create clearing in the forest that could be used to maintain early successional habitat and those plant species for a longer time frame than you would get out of the benefits of just a clear cut.
Yeah. My name's Jamie Jones. I'm the stewardship forester with the South Carolina Forestry Commission. I cover the Piedmont region and work with the Indian Creek crew here. What I want to do is just relate the thinnings you see here to what you may do on private land, especially with wildlife considerations. A lot of times in the forestry community and wildlife, they'll give target basal areas, thin to 60 or 70 or 90 or whatever. But if wildlife's your target, or quail especially, don't always think about basal area, the number. Really, you want to manage sunlight instead of timber. You want to get a certain amount of sunlight to the floor to spurn the new growth for species that quail and other wildlife prefer. So if you have, say, a common one is a stand that hasn't been thinned, maybe it's 18, 20 years old, you got a basal area of getting on up 140, 150. Don't always just say, okay, it needs to be thinned down to a 60 or 70 or 80, because of the crown ratio, that is the ratio of live crown on the stem. You may can thin that only to 100 and put the same amount of sunlight on the ground that you need. So that's one thing we wanted to talk about. It's very important, if you have a thinning job, or to get with a forester, find a registered forester that you know and trust, or call us to come out, give them your objectives for the stand, and let them give you a good recommendations on what needs to happen. Don't just say, well, I got this brochure that says wildlife needs to be thinned to a 60 basal area, or this forestry brochure said I need to thin to a 70. Well, if wildlife's your consideration or something, it may not necessarily need to be that number. Like I said, you want to manage for the sunlight that's there. And one other thing we wanted to talk a little bit about was some landowners, and not this mature wood, but hold this mature wood sometimes, and are afraid to cut it, afraid to clear cut it or start over that stand, because maybe they say markets are down. Well, I want to wait on the market to improve before I cut. And one thing we wanted to remind landowners to do is not only look at the market, because honestly, if you're waiting on timber markets to get a lot better, you're going to be waiting for a long time. Look at the market, look at the investment opportunities of that money when you liquidate it. If you're waiting on the timber market to increase 10%, just think about it. You could have liquidated that money, put it in the stock market, and it could have doubled by the time you're waiting on that market to improve. So talk to your financial advisors, your tax advisors, work with a registered forester or work with us, and we just wanted to hammer that point home a good bit. Not just taking the book answers a lot of times and applying it in reality on the ground, because there's a lot of variables that go into that.
In a regulated forest, typically you're going to produce the most wood and the most money over time, but you also can provide a net resource of wildlife habitat across the landscape on an annual basis and on a periodic basis. All of your eggs on in one basket. And for instance, if I was a landowner and I had 200 acres and all of it was one age class, keep in mind, when the saw timber market went down, it hit you on the whole lot. But if your age classes were evenly distributed, it may only have hit you on 25%, not on the whole lot. Same thing goes true for wildlife. If you had 200 acres and you clear cut it at one time, you've got maybe, at one point, maybe a 10-year-old stand that has just complete shade in the forest, and it's kind of like a biological desert for the wildlife that we're trying to manage right here, especially early successional habitat. But if you have the stands evenly distributed, even any year or even any 5 to 10 year period, you're going to have good quality saw timber, pulpwood, and seedling sapling trees. Your eggs aren't all in one basket, so you know when you look at an investment advisor, they want you diversifying. Well, you're diversifying your product classes and your age classes, and at the same time you're diversifying your habitat. So right here, everybody's got it. A little kind of quick thing, for quail. Typically, we want to ideally, you want to have stands going to be about 40 to 60 years old, and you want to have that kind of rotation that's going to be 40 to 60 years. Well, for landowners, a 60-year rotation is, that's going to cost you in the pocket. So maybe a good blend, for quail would be maybe about a 40-year rotation. So for a landowner, let's say that you have 200 acres and you wanted to manage a regulated forest on a 40-year rotation. So what you would do to get a regulated forest, you would take the 200 acres, divide it by the optimal rotation length, which would be 40, and so you get 5 acres per year. Well, we know we can't manage 5-acre stands. But if you look at it on 10-year increments, every 10 years you could be clear cutting and planting 50 acres. And it's, with that sustainability, you got habitat, but you got money that's coming in every 5 to 10 years. Every year, it runs like a machine. And so down here, you can kind of look, you can kind of think of this being habitat, timber, pulpwood, everything is kind of evenly distributed. So any given year, you've got at least 75% of your acres that you can possibly, potentially burn. So you can apply this to on a prescribed burn plan that you would burn maybe 1/2 to 1/3 of your age classes per year. So you maintain that habitat and income. And the same thing, you could also apply it to food plots. Same kind of rule of thumb. So if you're cool season disking, and you could say, okay, I want a cool season disc my open areas, 1/2 to 1/3 on an annual basis. So you can apply the same rule. But that's one thing I think we kind of fail to look at is maintain that regulated forest across the landscape. So if you're a landowner, some of y'all maybe later in years, and you're like, well, I don't know if I want to clear cut anything right now, because sometimes to get a regulated forest, you may clear cut a stand at an earlier age an option, and may carry stands at a later age an option. But at the same time, most of y'all want to keep your lands in the family, and so a regulated forest is going to be worth more money to your children and your grandchildren, and then plus it'll provide more values, for wildlife and everything like that.